All right, can I do a little story?
You can.
Cool. All right, so I wanted to do this little story because obviously the only thing that's being talked about right now, there's lots of stuff going on, but the only thing that's really being talked about is the whole Kamala thing. But I think that, like we always talk about, there's always these other things that are going on in the background that, that's because they're doing the sleight of hand and showing you all this other stuff. And so Mint Press News, they came out with this story, and it says, new report reveals U.S. Special Forces active in 22 African countries. The U.S. has roughly 6,000 military personnel scattered throughout the continent, with military attaches numbering diplomats in many, oh God, not again, embassies across Africa. All right, and then this is from the 10th. A new report published in South Africa newspaper, The Mail and Guardian, has shed light on the opaque world of the American military presence in Africa. Last year, elite U.S. Special Operation Forces were active in 22 African countries. This accounts for 14% of all American commandos deployed overseas, the largest number for any region besides the Middle East. American troops had also seen combat in 13 African nations, which everybody knows about our presence in the Middle East, but no one talks about our presence in Africa. And it wasn't until those 3 soldiers died in Niger that anybody even knew that we kind of had a presence in Africa. And so it kind of just, always comes down to that there's all this shit that's going on, like, all the stuff with the military that we know of, it's only a sliver of the information that's actually out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it says the U.S. is not formally at war with an African nation, and the continent is barely discussed in the reference to American exploits around the globe, which is essentially what I was saying, right? So the presence of the U.S. military, especially commandos, is rarely publicly acknowledged, either by Washington or by African governments. What they are doing remains even more opaque. U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, generally claims that special forces go no further than so-called AAA, so advise, assist, and accompany missions. Yet in combat, the role between observer and participant can become distinctly blurry. It says the United States has roughly 6,000 military personnel scattered throughout the continent, with military attaches outnumbering diplomats in many embassies across Africa. So again, there are more military personnel in the continent than there are diplomats. I think that says something.
Unbelievable. So that's like 22 countries out. I looked up it. Basically, they're saying there's like 54 countries in Africa. So basically, you're talking just like all over the
right, exactly,
all
half
over
the continent.
All over the continent. Yeah.
Right. So then earlier this year, The Intercept reported that the military operates 29 bases on the continent. One of these is a huge drone hub in Niger, something The Hill called the largest U.S. Air Force-led construction project of all time. The construction cost alone was over $100 million, with total operating costs expected to top $280 billion by 2024. This is one.
It must be 280 million. I can't believe it's 280 billion, because it went from the cost was 100 million to construct, and then operating costs were 280,000.
You have to think about all the personnel, like the safety. Yeah. I mean, I can, with all the equipment, yeah. I can definitely see it being $280 billion by 2024. Obviously, this is not, that's 4 years from now. It can, get up to more than that. Equipped with Reaper drones, the U.S. can now conduct cross-border bombing raids all over the north and west of Africa.
Wow.
Isn't that great?
You said that particular that particular base was going to be where?
Niger.
This is in Niger.
In Niger, okay.
Which is also where those soldiers died.
Which happens to be right next to Libya.
Right, where we destroyed one of the most successful African countries.
Right. So Washington claims that the military's primary role in the region is to combat the rise of extremists, which is always why I'm like, so even with Tulsi, it's like we can always find a way to say that we're fighting terrorism, and bam, that's it. Now we need another base, somewhere. It says, in recent groups have arisen, including Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and other Al-Qaeda affiliated groups. However, much of the reason for their rise can be traced back to previous American actions, including the destabilization of Yemen, Somalia, and the overthrow of Colonel Gaddafi in Libya.
But Daisy, that's how it's supposed to work. You stir the pot, you create trouble, and then so you win both ways because you have military contractors going into Libya and doing all the stuff, right? And then you create a problem, and you got to send in more military contractors and spend more in military budget. So it's a win-win for the military complex. What's wrong with that?
I know, right? And it's jobs, right? It's all about
jobs, of course, for my district, jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, I did see reference in when I was looking through some related pages here to like some Operation Enduring something. It wasn't profit, but they might as well be.
Yeah, seriously. So it says it is also clear that the United States plays a role in training many nation soldiers and security forces, something that also Israeli forces do, right? So for example, the US pays Bancroft International, a private military contractor, to train elite Somali units who are at the forefront of the fighting in the country's internal conflicts. According to the Mail and Guardian, these Somali fighters are likely also funded by US taxpayers. So I hope everyone enjoys that this is what their money is going to.
Yeah, why we can't have nice things.
Exactly. We can't have Medicare for all, right? We can't have...
Do you know how much that would cost? Oh my God. I know it's crazy, and they would never consider, they wouldn't even tell us about this stuff unless you really go digging for it.
Right. And thankfully there are affiliations like Minpress News who they do really great reporting. Unfortunately, they don't get the notoriety or the exposure, to be able to reach as many people, and they get smeared a lot by the mainstream rags, right, essentially.
Yeah.
So it says the U.S. military also occupies the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, claimed by the African island nation of Mauritius. In the 1960s and 1970s, the British government expelled the entire local population, dumping them in slums in Mauritius, where most still live. The United States uses the island as a military base and a nuclear weapons station. This island was critical to American military activities during both Iraq wars, and continues to be a major threat, casting a nuclear shadow over the Middle East, East Africa, and East Asia. So, yeah. I mean, again, this is, to me, like, just really sad that, this is what goes on in our name, because that's what people need to keep in mind, is that this is done supposedly to keep us safe. And as I read earlier, a lot of these rebel groups or these terrorist groups or whatever you want to call them, they've actually sprung up as a result of the actions that we've taken across the world. And of course, our favorite, Caitlin Johnstone, right? She recently wrote Don't Forgive Bastards, Notes from the Edge of the Narrative Matrix. And there was one line that I really thought that that she hit out the ballpark. So it says, without warmongering and militarism, sociopathic intelligence agencies won't be needed. Without sociopathic intelligence agencies, government secrecy wouldn't be needed. Without government secrecy, the government couldn't commit evil at home and abroad. It all starts with war.
Yeah. Well said. She's
was
brilliant.
Amazing.
Well, she says it's like, when they keep telling you that, well, human nature is to be violent, greedy, and whatever, and she said, no, it's not. That's that's the nature of the ruling elites. That's not the nature of everyone in
Right.
general. And they're used that as a kind of counter argument, so you can't argue with them. But yeah, I thought that was brilliant. I love it when Caitlin Johnston does those pithy. I think she just, every time she thinks of something, she writes it down. And then when she has about 10 of them, she publishes them as a on Medium.
Yeah, she gives credit to her husband for being, I think, a sounding board to, like, bounce ideas off of and refine them, and then she goes with it.
Is that okay?
But I read that like a year ago or something like that. She talked about her methodology, but yeah, she's got just really a brilliant writer.
But it like, the reason why that really resonated with me is because it is really true that, all of our problems essentially are centered around us going to war. And no one wants to talk about it. Everybody, and that's why, even the fact that you have to say domestic, or foreign policy is domestic policy. It's true. You shouldn't have to say that, but it's when it all comes down to, it's all in this effort for war. Our economy is based on war. Our diplomacy, the way that we interact with the rest of the world, is based on war. Everything
Right.
is based on war.
And the reason for that is
money.
Well, it's money, but it's also like it's getting hegemonic control of, make it a global colonial empire, basically. Where you can have access to cheap labor and cheap natural resources, right? So whether, ostensibly it's a fight against, radical fundamentalist elements in Africa, or it's a fight against, Russia or whatever, but it ultimately comes down to economics, which is control of cheap materials and cheap labor. And that gets back to the whole Lenin thing, the imperialism, the highest state of capitalism. So I think, war is an expression. War is the primary tool for that methodology, for that goal.